Okay, welcome everyone. Testing, I'm good, or where? Mic or, okay. Welcome everyone to the Langenberg Memorial Speaker Series sponsored by the Hammond Institute. I'm Tani Hunt-Ferrarini, a common sense economist and the R.W. Plaster Professor of Economic Education at Lindenwood University. Tonight I'm serving as your MC and discussion moderator. A special thanks is extended to everyone joining us on site and online. We appreciate your willingness to engage in open debate and contribute to discussions on political economy. Our evening with Lawrence Reed is one that is going to be talking and generating discussions about liberty and character. It promises to spark stimulating conversations. Our time together at View 17 in St. Louis, Missouri will offer networking opportunities throughout the St. Louis and St. Charles communities. Turn to your neighbor and reach out to the right and say hello and introduce yourself if you would, please. We also invite our online participants to remain engaged. Anyone, feel free to share your thoughts on social media using hashtag Hammond Institute or hashtag Liberty Character or hashtag FEE as we aim to create an engaging discussion. Tonight's evening and program will begin with Larry talking about liberty and character. After we open to questions from the audience, we will take note cards. They're close by. You've got a pen, easily accessible. Please write legibly. I need to read what you write. And we invite you to offer a question on tonight's topic. Our goal, again, is to focus on discussion on the political economy with attention drawn to the inherent forces that influence individuals acting and interacting in markets, government, and the interaction between the two across countries and time. So now let's turn to our esteemed speaker. Larry Reed joins us from Atlanta. He is currently the interim president of the Foundation on Economic Education, or FEE, where he serves as the interim president, and he served as the president from 2008 to 2019. Thank you. Before joining FEE, Larry was the president of the Mackinac Center for Public Policy in Midland, Michigan for 20 years. Over the span of his career, this individual has visited almost 90 countries across 6 continents, with Antarctica only being the last one remaining. I challenge you to go there. He's a prolific writer with many books and countless articles. And as we look over his career and browse through his website at lawrencewreed.com, one has to ask, what is this individual doing with his professional and personal pursuits? It doesn't take long to find evidence that he, Larry Reed, is inspiring, educating, and connecting people like you, me, individuals in this country, as well as around the world, and future leaders with sound economic principles, ethics, and legal establishments that are essential for a free society of flourishing people. It is a topic he will speak about tonight. It's one that you can read about through his publications. He has brought a couple with him. They're in the back of the room for all of you to enjoy. But Larry, I turn to you and I say thank you. We look forward to hearing more about how individual liberty, private property, free markets, entrepreneurship, and limited government combined with high moral character make us better by serving others. And with this, I ask you to come up on stage and take it away. Larry, join me.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Tawny. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me all right? Even in the back? Okay, great. Thank you. And Tawny is right. We do have a couple pamphlets for you back there. There should be enough, at least one for every couple, and probably enough for every single person. One on Roman history called Are We Rome, and the other one on the history of the Great Depression. So I'll put those there so they're out of my way. But I thank the Hammond Institute for having me, and for Tawny for being such a gracious host, Matt Adams also, who has worked very hard to bring this event about. It's great to be back in this part of the woods because I have so many friends here, and one of them years ago was Harry Langenberg Sr. And as his son Harry knows, my history with his dad goes back, I think, about a half a century, because I was teaching at Northwood University in Midland, Michigan when I first met Harry, and literally that started in 1977, so maybe 45 years anyway. And then both Harry's dad and Harry have served 9-year terms on the fee board. So it's great to be back in Langenberg town, I guess, and to see the Langenbergs again on this visit. I hope you'll visit the fee website. We specialize in educating high school and college students on ideas of individual liberty. And we also stress, as I will tonight, the component of liberty we call character, because we think it's indispensable, and that the two things, liberty and character, are really two sides of the same coin. But for you to come out on a night like this, with tornado sirens going off and the nasty weather, is a special tribute to you. Our founder at the foundation, Leonard Reed, no relation, but for years, whenever it was a bad weather day and people would be remarking about, oh, what a terrible day, or a good day for ducks, or whatever, he would always say, no, it's a great day. And often a person would say something like, haven't you looked outside? Or why do you say that? And he would say, every day is a great day, and that's my way of showing appreciation for the fact that when it comes to the weather, God and not the government is in charge. And it was a great conversation starter. Often people would say, oh, what do you do for a living? And he was more than happy to tell them. So tonight we're going to talk about liberty and character. I hit the road almost every week, it seems, to give a presentation on something somewhere. And it doesn't matter what the topic is. The most frequent question that I get is something like this, usually expressed this very way or some version thereof. What do you think the most important issue in the country is? And I know that people are expecting me to say things like, well, it's the $34 trillion national debt, or it's runaway government spending, deficits, opioids, drugs, the border, fill in the blank. There are a lot of very important issues out there. But I always say, no, the most important issue facing the country is the same today as it has always been. And it's the same as the most important issue in every other country, now and in the past, as well as the future. And that is character. I hope that one of the takeaways from my talk tonight for you is that character makes all the difference in the world. It explains so much of what happens, good and bad. And that if you expect to live in a free society, you must muster the character that's required of it. Why that's the case, I hope, will be apparent as we talk about this. But character is critically important. It's the #1 issue. Any country that doesn't get that right is not going to get much else right either. And I don't know, by the way, of any country or any civilization in all of history that lost its character and kept its liberties. Honestly, I don't know of a single one. They go hand in hand. If you're a people of solid, sound, strong character, you have a chance to live in freedom, which is something that few people in all of history have been able to enjoy. But if you lose your character, I can guarantee you that you will not, for long, live as free people. Some ism of the left will take over, whether it be socialism, communism, fascism, some kind of dictatorship, because people absent character are prey for those who seek and lust after power. Well, liberty and character is the title. I should say something about what I mean by liberty first, and then I'll spend most of the time on character. I think everybody at least everybody thinks they know what liberty is, right? And everybody will tell you, if you ask them, are you for it? Do you favor liberty? Would you like liberty? Do you want liberty? Everybody says, yes, I'm for it. Well, there's an awful lot of absence of liberty all over the world. So how do you explain that? If so many people, almost everybody says they're for it, but very few really have it, how do you explain that? If you look at the course of history, you'll find that some single-digit percentage, I don't know what the exact number would be, but I'm confident that it's in the single digits percentage of people who have ever lived could say with certainty that they enjoyed a considerable degree of liberty. Most people who have ever lived have lived as serfs or slaves or lived in fear of whoever was in charge, lived in fear of those in command of the armies or the police or whatever, or the lord of the manor or whatever. Most people who have ever lived had to be careful about what they said, what they did, where they did it, whether they started a business and what they sold and at what price, always concerned about those with political power who could snuff them out. America was born with a very different idea in mind. And we think we know in America what liberty is all about. We should. We founded the country on its principles. But I fear for its future when I see so many people who don't hold it very high on their list of priorities these days. But liberty is a kind of arrangement, you might say. It's a social, political, economic arrangement. It has its supporting institutions, but the general notion of it is that you should be in charge of your life. As long as you do no harm to others, you do not do violence to their rights, to their property, their lives, their families, whatever, then you can be left alone to live your life in liberty or in freedom. Liberty, of course, requires key institutions. You can't expect it to be sustained if major influential institutions in society turn against it and preach against it and say, no, it's a bad idea. We need very smart people in charge of our lives. They'll somehow figure out how to do it better than we can. So liberty is a very precious thing, not possessed by more than a single-digit percentage of all the people who have ever lived. There's nothing about it that's automatic. Nothing that says that just because our parents bequeathed it to us, that says we'll automatically always have it, or that our children and their children will always have it. President Reagan once said that we're just a generation away from losing it. History shows that time and again. It can be lost very quickly. And usually when it's lost, it's not by foreign invader, it's by what we do to ourselves. Well, I think you're here tonight because you have a pretty good concept, I'm willing to guess much better than maybe the average American, about what liberty is. Let me focus more on the other side of that coin, which is character. I've already indicated that it's darn important. It's so important, in fact, as I say, I don't think you'll ever find a country that will rise to greatness if its people lack character. They will not sustain greatness and goodness at the same time, without character. If they lose their character, they will lose their liberties, perhaps their lives as well. That's been the course of history, time and again, place after place. What is character? We use that term in different ways, don't we? Sometimes we may speak of another person and say, oh, he's a character. And that usually means that person is maybe a little different, eccentric, odd, or funny. We mean it in those kinds of lighthearted ways. And that's not the way I mean it tonight. You can be a character and not necessarily have very much of it. I want to talk about it as a personal attribute, or a collection of attributes. I want to describe for you what I think characterizes strong character, what those attributes are, and you can think, are we living up to them in America today? But I think of good character, solid character, the kind that's indispensable to the emergence of, the maintenance of a free society, includes the following attributes. This is not in order of importance. There may be others that I won't even mention tonight, but these are certainly among the most important character attributes that people must possess for their own personal success as well as the success of a free society. And one of them is honesty, commitment to the truth. And I don't mean, as some people refer to it today, his truth or her truth or your truth. I mean the truth. In fact, I think it's one of the disturbing signs of an erosion of character that this other terminology is rearing its ugly head. I remember during the Kavanaugh hearings, I first heard people in the United States Senate referring to truth as being, dependent upon who's speaking it, and using those adjectives like his truth, her truth. And I kept asking myself, wait a minute, is that different from the truth? Which side do you want to be on, his truth or the truth? And yet, that's a reflection of a lot of people these days, I think, who believe the truth is kind of relative. There's nothing absolute about it. It's whatever you want it to be. And it may be different from one person to the next or one moment to the next. That's a sign of a society that's given up on truth, that isn't really searching for it so much as trying to claim what they like to be the truth, whether it is or not. Honesty is indispensable to a free society as well as to strong personal character. Can you imagine what it would be like to live in a society where honesty is no longer a priority? When people at the drop of a hat think nothing of doing something, saying something that's dishonest. Can you imagine living in such a society? You would never know if somebody who's speaking to you was telling you the truth, whether you could shake their hand and make an agreement, walk away thinking you know where they're coming from. People who think there is no truth, no absolute truth, it's ever changing, it's whatever you want it to be, I don't know that I could trust them. And in a society where truth is no longer a sought-after feature of our lives, when we no longer think it's important, it's whatever you want it to be, that's a society that is in trouble. Let me give you an example from personal experience of a person who was above and beyond the call of duty when it came to honesty, because I've often thought, wow, I may never run into a more honest person than that one. And I can't even tell you what his name was, but he was Cambodian. In 1989, 10 years after the Khmer Rouge communists, who had ravaged the country, killed about 2 million out of 8 million, after they were kicked out in 79 by the Vietnamese. And now the Vietnamese by 89 were withdrawing and turning the country back over to Cambodians. I went over there with Dr. Hang Noor, who was an Academy Award-winning actor. If you saw the movie The Killing Fields, won Best Picture for 1985. It was about Cambodia. And to be able to see the country through his eyes as well as my own was a life-changing moment. But before going, I told the local newspaper there in Midland, Michigan, that I was going and that I was hoping the local hospital and some doctors might contribute some medical supplies if I could take some small quantities with me, because I knew it was a place in great need. And a woman from a local church called me and said, "Oh, I see you're going to Cambodia. We used to take care of 4 Cambodian families who were refugees. They came to the United States and we took them in. Our church took care of them here in Midland, Michigan. They now are scattered around the country, but we stay in touch. And every time they send anything back to their families, especially if there's money in the envelope, it doesn't get there. They would love it if you could take some envelopes with letters and cash to their relatives if you can find them in Cambodia." And I said, "Sure, I'll give it a try." And this woman said, "And don't come back with any of the money. If there's any family you can't find, bring the letter back if you want, but give the money to whoever you see needs it," which was everybody. Well, it was the night before I was to leave, and though I had found 3 of the 4 families and delivered the letters with the cash that was in them, I knew I wasn't going to make it to where the 4th family lived, quite a ways from Phnom Penh. So I had to think, well, what do I do? Who do I give the money to? And there was a man who had occasionally given me a ride in his cyclo, they called them, but like a rickshaw around town, who spoke just enough English. We had rudimentary conversations. He had an easy smile to him, and I just had a sense that this was a good man, clearly a very needy one too. So I gave him the fourth envelope, and I said, will you take this to Battambang, another city, and if you can find the family, give this envelope and the $200 in it to the family. He said he would, and then I left. What would most people expect to have happened thereafter? Probably never hear anything, and maybe the family never would see the letter. I mean, it's natural perhaps to assume that. But it was months later when that woman from Midland called me all excited, and she said, Larry, I have a letter from one of the families in Minnesota, relatives of the family you couldn't get to. And I have to read you this particular paragraph over the phone. And it said, thank you for the $200 that you sent. Well, I didn't tell you that I told the man, you can keep 50 if you can get it there. He didn't keep a penny. Poor as he was, he gave all $200 to the family to whom the envelope was addressed. He didn't have to do that. And I thought to myself, if ever I was in a situation where he was there and my life depended on him, I think I would turn it over to him if I had to, at the drop of a hat. Because anybody who would do that, honest in what seemingly small things, is probably a decent person in other ways as well. And I, ever since, have thought, what a world it would be if everybody practiced that level, that standard of honesty. Wouldn't it be a different world? You wouldn't recognize it. It'd be like heaven on earth. So honesty is critically important, and even a thief knows that. You know, a thief, I mean, he wants to steal from you, but he sure hopes you don't steal from him. So he doesn't think his personal value has universality to it. He just wants to do it, but he doesn't want you to do it. But honesty can't live without it. A society that forgets its commitment to truth and to what's right will not be long for this world. A second attribute of strong character, indispensable to a free society, is intellectual humility. I use that adjective because if I just said humility, some people think, oh, that means kind of like running yourself down. I don't mean that at all. Nor do I mean, needless boasting either. I mean intellectual humility, the recognition that as smart as you may be, no matter how many PhDs may be after your name, there is still a universe of knowledge out there that you don't know. And that's going to be just as true the day you check out as it was the day you were born. Not everybody practices this. There are just an awful lot of people in the world, I run into them all the time. I find an awful lot of them in Washington who lack humility, who think that, they could live your life better than you can. They're so smart, they don't need to pay any attention to you. Leonard Read, again, the founder of FEE, wrote a famous essay that some of you may have read, I, Pencil. How many have read I, Pencil? You can find it online, very famous essay. It's changed lives all over the world in the 60-some years it's been around. He tells the story of how a pencil comes into being, and he has the pencil doing it. It's the pencil talking. And the pencil explains, I'm made up of some wood and the stuff in the inside called graphite. And there's a metal ferrule, I think it's called, at one end that holds the eraser in place. And that eraser comes from some trees in Malaysia. And he goes through the whole process of how pencils are made. And it's amazingly complex. Everything from, the waitress at the coffee shop where the loggers have their breakfast before they go out and cut the trees down. She's kind of involved in the whole process by serving breakfast to the loggers. And there's just endless people who come together without any central command. Nobody at the top is saying the peasants need pencils, you will make pencils. They just happen all you want and whenever you want them. Not because anybody's forced to make them, but because of the magic of the marketplace. People coming together and producing something that not a single one of them entirely on their own could make themselves. Think of that. That's the amazing thing about something as simple as a pencil. If you yourself we're told, you go make a pencil, but you cannot rely upon any knowledge, any skills of anybody else. You got to start completely from scratch. You can't read a book about pencils. You just got to do it from what you know pencils to be. Make them from scratch. I don't know that, or at least the point of the essay was, nobody could do it. Nobody. So when anybody ever suggests to you that they're smart enough, say, to plan an economy of other people, of 340 million Americans, you can say, you're not as smart as you think you are. You can't even make a pencil, which I think is a pretty powerful rebuttal. That's why that essay has been so remarkable over the years. So many people who had such confidence in central planners, all of a sudden they read this and they say, oh my gosh, how presumptuous to think that a handful of people could plan an economy when none of them can even make a pencil. It really changes your outlook. Intellectual humility has a remarkable effect on most people. If you are humble intellectually, if you realize that how much you don't know, you tend to kind of look inward a bit more. And instead of wanting to reform the world, you tend to reform yourself, which is really a healthy thing, because if you want to reform the world, it can't be reformed until we reform ourselves, right? One at a time. And a humble person is not one who presumes he or she can make your plans for you. A humble person is one who recognizes his or her own shortcomings, the fact that there's a universe of knowledge out there he doesn't know yet, and he's going to start trying to learn as much of it as he can. An unhumble person is just the opposite. An unhumble person will be arrogant, condescending. An unhumble person will tell you what to do and be confident that they're right all the time. And that's why Washington is probably the most unhumble city in the country. It's full of people with plans for your life, even if their own is a mess. That's the irony. So many of them, are planning your life, but they haven't got their own in proper order yet. But it doesn't seem to faze them. But humble people have a chance, I think, to live in freedom, in peace with each other, focusing on self-improvement instead of running other people's lives. Another attribute of solid character is courage. Courage. I don't think in a dangerous world you can retain freedoms if you're timid. If the nation is by and large a timid nation in a dangerous world, it's just a matter of time before somebody is more than happy to take what you've got, including your country. And in American history, as well as the history of so many other places, we have such sterling examples of people who could muster courage that saves the day, that keeps a nation free. And that's a remarkable thing that we should not forget, that we should never fail to recognize, to encourage, because courage is all too rare. Courage means you're willing to speak truth to power. You're willing to take risks. And as so many have, even put your life on the line for what you know to be right, if necessary. You run from a fight, you'll lose most of the time. So courage is important, and it's something we should honor and promote and try to convince our young people that it is a very good virtue to pursue. Be courageous. That doesn't mean be offensive or in other people's faces or do any harm to others, but it just means you stand up for what you know to be right and say so. Another important characteristic is responsibility. I can't imagine a free society of irresponsible people, can you? Responsibility, the idea that you hold yourself accountable, you learn from your mistakes. You admit you made mistakes. A lot of people won't even do that. They make mistakes, and if they blame anybody, it's somebody else. A society of irresponsible people would be a society of people who say, it's not my fault, even if it was. It's yours. You owe me a living. Give me something. I'm entitled. You're to blame. Who wants to live in a society like that? That sounds like childhood, perhaps, not adulthood. We're surrounded these days by people who are proud to call themselves socialists. But you'll find time and time again they're actually advocating a flight from responsibility. They don't want to hold anybody accountable for their own misdeeds. They seem to want to excuse every bad behavior that comes along. That's why I often think that a socialist who wants to concentrate power in government and spend like crazy and run your life, socialists are sort of like babies with guns. In the sense that, like babies, you know, they want it now, they don't care what it costs, they don't care where it comes from, they demand it, they're entitled to it, they want it now, and they scream and holler if they don't get it. You're supposed to grow out of that. That's part of what growing up to be an adult means. It means you recognize at some point that, hey, just because I want it doesn't mean I should have it, especially if it can only be supplied me at somebody else's expense. You start to realize as you mature into an adulthood that other people have rights too, to things like life and property. You don't just demand it because you're here. And yet there are people who are far beyond babyhood who behave that way. Thank goodness I don't think most people do yet, but if we ever got to the point where most people think that way, I think liberty would be the first thing to be lost in that kind of society. Another important attribute is gratitude. Gratitude. A few years ago, there was a team of bioethicists led by a man named Emmons. You can go on to Amazon or Barnes & Noble, type in his name. I think the first name was Robert. And I can't remember the title of the book, but he wrote a book which produced the findings of his team of bioethicists who studied for years this trait called gratitude. Wanted to find out, does this spirit of gratitude, a grateful spirit, does it have any impact physiologically on people? That was what they wanted to find out. They came to the remarkable conclusion that a grateful spirit, being a person of gratitude, can add as much as 7 years to your life. Get the book and you'll see what I mean. It sounds incredible, but he said people who understand the importance of gratitude and cultivate a grateful spirit in themselves, they're much more at peace with life and with others than, you know, there's so many people today who are angry all the time. They're not the ones who walk up and say, hey, thank you for doing that. No, they're too busy being mad, angry. Everybody's an oppressor or oppressed. And so the world's just a never-ending, nasty place to them, and they don't have a sense of humor, and they can't bring themselves to say thanks. You know, the father of communist theory, Karl Marx, if you've ever read much about what he was like as a person, do you think he was a kindly, grateful gentleman of good manners? And no, just the opposite. He was vitriolic, full of hate. Epithets would spew forth from him at the drop of a hat. His own mother, this is quoted by the great British historian Paul Johnson in his book Intellectuals. Highly recommended. Every chapter is on a different left-wing intellectual. One is about Karl Marx, but he quotes Karl Marx's mother and provides the source of the quote. Karl Marx's mother once said that she wished her son Karl would accumulate some capital instead of just writing about it. I mean, that is the ultimate put down. Can you just imagine Karl Marx scribbling away, you know, angry at the world, writing about capital, and his mother standing there, why don't you get a job? Well, he didn't listen to her, unfortunately, maybe because she wasn't the source of much of his income. His friend Friedrich Engels took care of that for him. But have you ever noticed how people of the socialist left are very angry, nasty people? They really are. They're hard to get them to smile, to lighten up, tell a joke, because you know, to them everybody's an oppressor or an oppressed person. I don't know how you go through life that way. I don't know how a free society emerges among people who are just mad at everybody else all the time. So gratitude's pretty important. It's important to your personal health and to the health of a country. All of these various attributes are. I want to leave you with a story about a person I came to know who exemplified so many of these traits. And if we have time in the Q&A, if you want more stories, just let me know. But this guy I want to tell you about because I knew him, and starting tomorrow, right here in St. Charles, a movie will premiere. It'll be all over the country within a week. I know it's showing tomorrow, that tells the story of him. The movie is called One Life. And it's about a man named Nicholas Winton. And I love to read biographies of great men and women, but it's even better when you actually meet one and you realize in their presence how special they are. This guy embodied all the traits that I talked about. He was a hero. He was a man who came to be celebrated throughout his country of Great Britain, was knighted by the Queen for what he did, that I'm about to tell you. And he was given honors from countries all over the world. Yet I had no trouble calling him when he was age 94, saying, I have seen the documentary about you and I'd like to come meet you. And he told me on the phone, well, when you get to London, take the train from the Paddington station to Maidenhead and call me and I'll come down and pick you up. And then I told somebody else from Maidenhead that's how I was going to get to Nikki's house. And I remember her saying, I keep telling him to get off the road, you're 94. So she ended up giving me the ride. But Nicky Winton in 1938 was a 29-year-old stockbroker in London, 1938. That was the last full year of peace before the outbreak of World War II. In many ways, it was a tumultuous year that was a harbinger in so many ways of what was to come. Hitler grabbed Austria in March of 1938 without firing a shot. He then began to threaten Czechoslovakia. He demanded the borderlands called the Sudetenland, the outer perimeter of northern Czechoslovakia bordering Germany. And during that summer, there was a lot of concern around the world that this was going to lead to war. And he wasn't, he meant business. And you might recall from your history that it was in September of '38 that the conference was held in Munich. Remember the Munich conference? We think of it today in association with what single word? Appeasement. That's where the French and the British and Mussolini from Italy, Hitler from Germany sat down, and the Western Allies signed an agreement saying, okay, you can take the Sudetenland if you want, but don't go any further. But we won't make a fuss if you take that part. And for the moment, the world thought, wow, we dodged a bullet. War has been averted. Well, Nicky Winton was one who didn't believe that. He knew in his gut that somebody like an Adolf Hitler wasn't going to be satiated by a piece of paper. This was not peace in our time, as Neville Chamberlain declared. But nonetheless, at the end of '38, Nicky Winton planned a vacation to Switzerland. Before he left London, a good friend of his who worked in the British Embassy in Prague, Czechoslovakia, got in touch with him and said, Nicky, don't go to Switzerland, come here instead. There's something you've got to see. I promise you will be glad you did, and I'll take you around. I've got to show it to you. Nicky said, okay, I'll go to Prague first, but then I'm going to Switzerland. He got to Prague, and what his friend wanted him to see, and he gave him a tour of, were refugee camps in and around Prague, full of thousands of mostly Jewish families at the onset of winter, living in tents at best, not knowing how to get out, but fearful that their lives were at stake. And they, of course, certainly were. It was only a matter of a few months till March of '39 when Hitler took the rest of Czechoslovakia. But how to get these people out? The world said, we don't have any problem here. We just signed an agreement. Hitler says he won't go any further. You're not in any danger. So no, we can't take you. What do you think Nicky Winton found as he walked through the refugee camp? Parents by the dozens coming up to him as a perfect stranger and saying, sir, we don't know you, but will you take our children to safety? We can't get out. No country will take us, but can you at least get the children out? Can you imagine how desperate a situation has to be for a parent to ask a perfect stranger to take their children to some other country? Nicky could have said, if he was not a man of sterling character, he could have said, oh, I'm so sorry, what can I do? I'm only one person, I'm supposed to be on vacation, best of luck. Most people perhaps would have done that. But Nicky immediately dropped everything, sprung into action, said there's got to be a way. He sent telegrams and letters to governments all over the world saying, if I can get the children out, will you at least allow them in to your country? Guess how many countries said yes? 2, you know the story, only 2, his own Britain and Sweden. And Britain said, the Home Office said, you've got to raise what today would be about $3,000 per child to put on deposit, because we think this is all going to blow over, they're going to have to go back and we don't want to have to pay for that. So he had to raise that kind of money at the same time. He had to find foster families all over Britain and a few in Sweden who would take the children in, not knowing for how long, might be for good. And he organized in the end, in the early months of 1939, 9 different rail transports of children. The first 8 had 669 children. Some of them were babies that parents gave up tearfully at Prague Station, trusting this man to get them to safety. 669. Got them to foster families awaiting them mostly in Britain. He didn't tell anybody about this. When the war started, he joined the RAF, where he served for 6 years. Later met the woman who became his wife, never even told her. It was kind of forgotten. The kids grew up. Almost none of them ever saw their parents again. And the story was kind of forgotten. Many of them didn't know who got me out, who organized that. He didn't tell anybody, except those who helped him do it. Until in 1988, 50 years later, his wife is going through the attic and she comes across a box. I'm sure this will be in the movie. And she finds all this stuff, visa documents and pictures of kids and a list of names, and wants to know, what is this? He finally tells her. And she says, this is a story that must be known. These children would love to know who you are and what you did. And so it got out and went on British national television on a program called That's Life, where they seated him in the front row. He knew he was called in because they were going to tell the story, and you know, he had to be there, and they had the list of names and all the stuff that was in the box. He didn't know who else was in the audience around him, but the hostess on national television says, after telling the story about what this man did, she said, might there be someone in this audience who owes their life to Nicky Winton? If so, please stand. And in one of the greatest moments of television history, I think, everybody stood up. They had the list. They went around trying to find these kids who are now in their 50s and 60s, and they were there to meet, for the first time, the man who saved their life. Well, he lived to 106. He died in 2015, and the last I saw him was on his 106th birthday. It wasn't quite as mobile, but he was as sharp as ever upstairs, and I remember thinking to myself, somebody who lived such a long life like this, such a good life, and all the things he did I didn't even tell you about that in his later life, so helpful to British society. That was God's way of saying, well done, thy good and faithful servant. What a remarkable man. Why did he do what he did when he didn't have to? Because character matters, and he had it by the boatloads. Don't you wish everybody did? He had character. And he had humility as well. Every time I took students to see him, and I'd have them watch a documentary that came out about him in the 90s, and so they knew who he was ahead of time. They were in awe to be in his home and having lunch with him. And any student who said anything like, oh, you're such a hero, Mr. Winton, he would immediately say, oh, no, please don't call me that. I just did what I could. No, he did a lot more than that. So I'm grateful for character, because when I see it in spades, I see that it not only makes for a better life, it makes for a free one, and it even saves lives as well. And if this were an audience of young people, I would tell you, I'll tell you anyway, that it's something that you can never over-invest in. It's something that if you spend the rest of your life devoting yourself to, trying to improve it, be better at it, be a person of solid character, you will never regret that. You will pass up some temptations from time to time, but you'll go to your reward someday, proud of the legacy you left behind. And others will talk about you, about what an example you were, what a difference you made just by being who you were because of your character. That's how important it is. So I leave you with this challenge tonight to make character more important than you ever have in the building of your life and that of the lives over whom or over which you influence, because there is no better investment, no more fruitful investment of your time and your resources than in personal character. If you want to keep your freedom, it's absolutely a must. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Okay.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions? I've got a few. Can you write it down and then hand it over to, got any written questions? Can you project your voice for me and be really short? No? Yeah.
I cannot be short.
Okay. Well, how about this? Why don't we
just say this? How many people here are under 60? Under 50? Under 40? Under 20?
May we have the question?
The question is, our educational system, we all are connected. My education is beyond your imagination. That's not the point. The point is, it's the education of kindergarten and up.
Yeah.
You start there. You don't start at the college level. Those kids are being brainwashed and indoctrinated with DEI, wokeism. They don't know whether they're a man or a woman. They try to think it's, when do I transition? When do I go to the hospital and cut all of my parts off or change my parts? That's where we are today. We're
Okay,
in a
thank
civil
you.
war.
Okay, what's the question? May we have the question?
Well, the question is, how do you fix it?
I think it starts even before kindergarten. I think it starts, maybe as early as age 2, as your children begin to observe you. You can't impart what you don't possess. So if you want a child to grow up with solid character, look for opportunities to exhibit it, to showcase it, to show how it is so rewarding to be a person of character. I tell you, to this day, I tend to be a generous tipper, if I may admit that. But mainly because of what my dad taught me. By example, we used to fish the Beaver River in western Pennsylvania. And one time when we were back at the dock, he dropped his key ring in the water, probably 4 or 5 feet of water. And he never liked the water. He'd boat on it, but he'd never get in it. He used to say, I don't get in any body of water unless I can see the drain. But there were kids nearby who were obviously pretty good swimmers, and he motioned to one, and when the kid came over, he said, if you can get my keys, I'll give you a good tip. And the kid dove down, took him maybe a minute, and he brought the keys up. And at that time, to give a 10-year-old kid, 12-year-old kid $5 would have been pretty generous. My dad, and we were not a wealthy family, he gave him a $20 bill, which blew me away. It's like $100 today? I don't know. But what that said to me was, when somebody goes out of the way to do something for you, reward them, thank them, create a situation where they'll want to do that again. And so ever since, that's affected me. And when somebody does something good for me, I feel like I want to reward them for it, because I want to encourage that activity. But don't wait for this, and don't expect the schools to make up for the character that you as a parent did not teach. They will not do it. Increasingly, they will not do it. Character sounds so often like, oh, that sounds religious, and we as public schools aren't supposed to get into that. So they won't touch it. I wish they would, but it really has to come from the parent more than any other single source at those early ages.
At the early ages, but as we grow older, we see opportunities, expanding opportunities to educate ourselves.
Yeah.
And your journey has been an interesting one, where you assumed responsibility early on in your high school years on advancing your knowledge you want to provide us with a little insight into that?
Well, I took an early interest as a teenager in liberty and in the peoples of the world who I thought were oppressed and didn't have it. I don't know, I've often wondered, where did that come from? I mean, my mother had no interest in current events or political matters at all. My dad, not very much. But I remember in 1966, I would have been 13 or 12. My mother said, we're going to go up to Pittsburgh and see this movie called The Sound of Music. How many have seen that? Everybody's seen that, right? And I didn't want to see it. I remember thinking, Sound of Music, what's that? A bunch of people singing and dancing. I didn't want to see that. But she said, no, it's based on a true story. You got to see it. Well, I was enthralled with it. I loved the music. I loved the story. And I think looking back on it, that was the first time that I ever realized that there were people in the world who don't enjoy the kind of basic freedoms we have here. I mean, here's this wonderful family in Austria, 1937, 38, and they haven't harmed anybody. And here's this rotten regime next door, and they want to draft the father into their navy and take over the country. And I thought, how dare them? Did that really happen? And so I started reading everything I could about the history of pre-World War II Europe. And then, if you recall, many of you will, what happened in 1968, not in Austria, but next door in Czechoslovakia, Prague Spring, when the world was riveted on Czechoslovakia because a new breed of leaders came into power in that communist country, and they were moving the country more towards freedom. And that's why they called it Prague Spring, a flowering of free expression and so forth. And the world wondered, would the Soviets allow this to happen? Or would they invade? And I watched that and I was cheering on the Czechs. And in early August of '68, I was walking down a hallway in our house, and my dad was in his bed, in his bedroom, and he had the radio on. And he hollered for me, hey, come here. He turned up the radio, and it was the first reports of the Warsaw Pact invasion of Czechoslovakia. And I remember like it was yesterday how I felt. I thought, troops and tanks being sent in to kill and imprison people. Why? Because some rotten foreign government doesn't like the way they think, doesn't want them to be in charge of their own lives. And I wanted to do something, but what can you do at 12 years of age, or 13, 14? And well, within a couple days, there was a little blurb in our paper that said a group called Young Americans for Freedom was going to have a demonstration in downtown Pittsburgh to protest the Soviet invasion. So I got a bus ticket, and I went up to Pittsburgh and joined in, and we burned the Soviet flag in Mellon Square. And I joined Young Americans for Freedom. And at that time, every new member got a box of stuff from FEE, including the magazine that FEE produced, some great books on freedom and free markets. And the message was, you got to read this. And it changed my life. And I just came away from it all thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do for my future, but it's going to have something to do with helping to liberate my fellow human beings. Because I just don't like anybody, any tyrant, pushing people around. So I've been involved in one way or another doing that ever since.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And the challenge to you is to realize that, you know, the young people aren't in these spaces right now. They come out of the womb with a smartphone in their hands. Mm. And so we place things in bite-sized pieces. We push it out through multimedia technologies. We're learning more about AI, and now with the advancements in AI, the student becomes an owner and a stakeholder in his or her education, which is really an incredible thing. Mm-hmm. Our task on the higher education front is to be present to help with the algorithms, to check for the biasness of some of these different thoughts that are going out, and they're advancing, you know, the beauty of socialism, the evils of capitalism. So those are our challenges, and it's constantly evolving. So I'm actually more optimistic than you are, sir, about what's happening in the world today. We are challenged, and if you look at some of the Pew Research, even though we say that there is a swirl in the support of young people for socialism at the expense of capitalism, actually it's relatively stagnant. And that's what students do, young people do, is they try and test all of us sitting in this room. That's what we did as young people. So our hope is that we meet them in their preferred spaces. And that's not on site and face to face. It's online for many of them. And they have these at their disposal. But the great thing about VE, the Free to Choose Network, Stossel in the Classroom, the Hammond Institute, and other organizations is we are making these things digitally available, but we're also making them very interactive. And so we have several classes that are joining us online tonight and participating virtually. So I encourage all of you to go out and have a conversation with some of the young people, and especially those that oppose some of the views that you hold. Have a conversation, help them understand where you're coming from, but most importantly, listen to them and at least recognize and understand from where they're coming. So with that, why don't we turn to talking about some of the, how about Social Security, and bring that into the character conversation. He lectured 5 times on campus today, and the students were very interested in that topic, and people like myself, especially with 2032, just a few years down the road, and we have some interesting challenges to face.
Well, that came up at more than one talk since I've been here the last couple of days, Social Security. And I used it as an example to demonstrate to students why it's important as policymakers and as ordinary citizens to think of the long run, not just the short run. And I said, when Social Security was started up, and for a long time, everybody thought it was a good idea because it didn't seem to cost very much, and not many people at first were on the receiving end. There were lots of people paying into it, looked fine. But in the next decade, the chickens are gonna come home to roost. And we're gonna have a big problem because either, as the Social Security Trust Fund managers have themselves pointed out, in about 12 or 13 years, we're going to have to either drastically raise taxes or drastically cut benefits because the money's not there. It's not a fiscally solvent institution. Now, why is that relevant to the long-term, short-term thing? There are a lot of things you can do that make you feel good for the moment or make this or that noisy group happy. Elect or re-elect a particular politician, but which could in the long run prove disastrous, right? It's like if you go to a party, you can drink like a fish and feel pretty good for a while, but then the next day you don't feel so good. The answer is not to have done that in the first place. If I could go back to ancient Rome, which we now know lost its liberties through the rise of the Roman welfare state, where government came to be not just a protector of freedom, but a guarantor of everybody's livelihood, spent themselves into bankruptcy over it. If I could go back to the 1st century BC, in the last decades of the Roman Republic, as they were losing their liberties and the Roman welfare state was growing like crazy, I would love to have an audience of Romans and tell them this. I said this to the students today, and you could hear a pin drop. I said, now what do you think the Romans would say? What would their response be? If I went back and said, I've come from the future and I know where you're headed. I can tell you where this stuff is going. You all feel pretty good right now. Seems inexpensive. You're getting goodies. Politicians are getting votes. I promise you this or that, and you feel pretty good about it. But I'm going to tell you that this is going to go on and feed on itself until you are buried in a mountain of debt. Your government will destroy the coinage in an effort to help pay the bills of it all. And politicians will buy votes at your expense with it and use the power they gain to take what's remaining of your liberties. And it's all going to come crashing down, and we're going to read about you in the history books. Now, do you still want to do this? And I asked the students, what do you think they'd say? And I think the consensus was a lot of Romans would probably have said, oh, so what? Who cares? The next future generations will worry about that. We want it now. Is that a responsible adult way to behave? I don't think so. And yet, we never give much thought, do we? Not many Americans, about where all this is headed and how unsustainable it is, this crazy expansion of spending and dependence upon the state. Barbara?
I think that's a big problem, is delayed gratification.
Yeah,
We give our children money before they make the grade.
yeah.
We give them a car before they have a job to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's at the basis of all of this.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think as parents we can do a better job in most cases in teaching things like self-discipline and avoiding current gratification for a better day. But you know, government does so much to undermine that. When it conducts inflation, it undermines the incentive to save. When it offers you all kinds of goodies, you know, so many take it, and then they come to think of it as they're entitled to it. And they don't care, you know, when it comes to student debt. I know there are a lot of students out there who are very uncomfortable with the government forgiving their debt because they're the forward-thinking students with a little moral conscience in them, and they're thinking about the kids who decided not to go to college, not to incur debt, who are now going to pick up the tab for them if their debts are forgiven. But there are a lot of students who are more than happy to have their debts forgiven and don't care who pays for it. I wonder, did their parents ever tell them anything about this? Maybe not. Maybe they should have.
Okay. One more question, and then we'll wrap it up for the evening.
It is so frustrating to hear officials say, we don't have enough tax revenue for
Yeah.
child care and that kind of thing. But our retired public school teachers, they take European vacations every year.
Yeah.
They're the ones that are driving Mercedes. Do you think in 10 years, if we have to cut Social Security, that we will cut state and federal pension plans, or will there be a riot in the street?
Hold on, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe the Missouri teachers contribute to Social Security.
That they don't get Social
They
Security?
do not, no,
St. Louis City teachers get Social Security, but not
the pension,
Yeah.
yes. So that's,
And I don't care what professional athletes make. The taxpayers aren't forced to buy their tickets or buy their merchandise. Taxpayers are forced. You want me to run for office? Taxpayers are forced to make millionaires out of retired public school superintendents.
Yeah.
And I know firefighters work really hard when they work. Some days they don't leave the fire station except to go to Schnucks, and that takes 3 or 4 of them to go to Schnucks.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if we have fascism in this country, I think it's going to come out of government union workers.
It might. You know, there's an entitlement mentality these days that has really taken root in America, unfortunately. And hey, maybe you've got a very good public school, but an awful lot of them isn't, or aren't, I should say. I went to one. But you can't expect government schools, to which some 88% of the American people go to, you can't expect them to teach character, or you can't expect a teacher to say to the students, oh, by the way, I just thought you'd want to know that my salary depends upon your parents at gunpoint coughing up the tax money. Just thought you'd want to know that. This is not a private school that, you know, where we have to earn your patronage. They will never admit to that, most of them. And yet that is a fundamental of the way government operates. It's force. Our founders understood that. That's a big reason to keep it small. But if your kids grow up thinking that, well, if the government does it, it's like voluntary, it's the democratic process, it's okay. You know, they got 2 strikes against them right at the start. So I lament the fact that we ever turned the education of our kids over to the government. Because even well-meaning teachers, they get brainwashed in the education schools that tell them, here, tell the kids this, but don't tell them that. It's often what they don't tell the students that's a bigger sin than what they do tell them. Oh, yeah. And the states where they reign powerful in state capitals are where the public schools are the worst.
Okay, we have one very short question, and then we'll wrap up, okay? Short?
It's short. So
Okay,
to
thank
give you
you.
the exact statistics, at the PSRS and the peer system, people can retire after 30 years of service, and they can get 80% of the salary, which means they can retire at about 52 or 53. The school district provides 7.25, and the employee takes a 7.25 towards the retirement system. They then, again, get 80% of what they typically make, and the fund is literally over $55 billion of money currently. So to your concerns about them having a great system, you're absolutely correct.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, I want to thank all of you for joining
Thank
us.
you.
Join me in thanking Larry for being here from Fee.
Thank you very much.
Of course, we have the Hammonds in the audience. We want to say thank you for sponsoring the Langenberg event. And we also have Harry Langenberg Jr. in the room, so thank you.
We want you to come back because we're not done.
Oh, okay. I'm not either, so just give me a holler.
All right, please stay in touch. You can reach out at thehammondinstitute.org. Also, use social media, hashtag Hammond Institute, hashtag Liberty Character, hashtag Fee. And we're only an email away, so we look forward to seeing you soon and talking to you often. Have a delightful evening and stay dry.
Yeah. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank you
it.
so much.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Thank you.